This is very interesting. I've said this a lot. When we explore the Jewish roots of the faith, we have a lot of material that people aren't even looking at. Pseudepigrapha, Apocrypha, and the writings of the Apostolic Fathers. And this is by Melito of Sardis, and this is probably a Messianic Jewish Passover Seder or Haggadah from probably the year 150. So it's very interesting. So he was the word is Quatrodeciman. How many people have heard of the Quatrodecimans before? What does that mean? So what had happened is, according to the early church fathers, we had John, right? And this is in extra-biblical literature and things, that John went to Ephesus and wrote his gospel, and there's a lot of people who knew John. In fact, I think the church father Polycarp knew John, and then Irenaeus knew Polycarp. So you had a chain of people who were directly in contact with the apostles. And what had happened is the communities that were founded by John, the evangelist, they kept the Passover on the 14th of Nisan, right? And in Latin, that's Quatrodeciman, which means the 14ers. So these are the people of the 14th, because that's when so to them, it didn't matter. They celebrate what we call Easter. They weren't using those terms back at that time. Celebrating the resurrection and our atonement. The communities found by John the Evangelist were taught by him to celebrate on the Passover, the so-called Jewish Passover. And Melito of Sardis, he was a Jewish Christian, and this edition, we have the original Greek here, and then we have the English translation. But this is kind of a fascinating book. And this might be the earliest Passover Seder we have at all. Because you think about it, we want to go, as a historian, we got, Lucas is going to Sam Houston State University, and that's where I went. I majored in history. And what we try to do as historians is look at primary sources. And I don't think we have Passover Seders or Haggadahs until, I have to look in here to see that this person has researched it very deeply. But what we look at is how was Passover celebrated. You want to look at the oldest sources available, right? Like the Dead Sea Scrolls, Josephus, and Philo. And they don't really say a whole lot. And this is kind of interesting. And he's saying, let's look at some of the oldest Jewish sources we have, which would be like the Mishnah. Well, this is 50 years older than the Mishnah, right? Because if this was written around 150. And this is, I'm going to look at this. I might talk about this later. So what he does in this is there's a section where he's rebuking the Jewish people for rejecting the Messiah, right? And that sounds, to our ears, it sounds a little bit anti-Semitic, but they look at it, it's no, he is a Jewish Christian himself, right? It's a Jewish person rebuking his fellow Jews. So it's kind of amazing that this is a Quatrodeciman, basically a Passover Haggadah. Yes?
Yeah, I think we miss the point a lot when it'd be like, okay, to put it back in modern political terms, it'd be like, come on, country, why are you turning so liberal? Are we saying that there are no conservatives in our country? There's tons and tons and tons and tons of conservatives. Just because somebody calls somebody out doesn't mean that they're saying there's none of the other. I think that we miss a lot of times in these scriptures and other texts, when they talk about this guy speaking to the Jews, we think, people interpret that means all Jews were this way, yeah. and by far it was not that. And the fact that he's calling out the ones who were wrong is no ways a rebuke against those who are right.
Right. Another thing is some people they try to portray John's epistle as anti-Jewish. That's one of the most Jewish that's got tabernacles in it, it's got Hanukkah in it. In some ways, John's gospel is one of the most, after Matthew, one of the most Jewish of the four gospels.
Or like the Essenes looked at the Jews as a polluted, illegitimate line of Jews with an illegitimate high priest.
Right.
Or that Elijah thought he was the last prophet. We all think we're alone.
Right. One thing that's kind of interesting about this I want to mention is he's arguing in here that in early times, people were expecting the Messiah to return in the Passover season, right? I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but that expectation is seen in the modern, it's in this Haggadah, but it's also seen in modern Passover Haggadahs. Why? Elijah. Why is Elijah coming? They're expecting Elijah to come because the early Jewish Christians, they're expecting the Messiah to come for some reason. I have to reread this book. I've been thumbing through it during the Passover. The other thing that's very interesting about this, and I was mentioning certain lost books, that it could be divine providence. The Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, and the Nag Hammadi codices. There's things I like in the Nag Hammadi codices, there's things I don't like, but it seems like that was a major discovery, including the Gospel of Thomas. And I was talking about
prophecy that we'll see clearer as the time comes.
The Acts of Philip, which is also, this is found in Mount Athos. Apparently it was found in the 70s, but this was only translated in English. It's found it 2 years after I was born, 1974. It was only translated in English in 2012. Right? So this material, which has been hidden for so long, and it could be a sign of the last days, right? I believe that for us to restore the church to what it's supposed to be, we need to go back to the apostles, and maybe that's why this literature is being discovered. One more thing I want to mention, this is kind of fascinating, is there's another. So this is written by a Messianic Jew in the year around the year 150. It says circa 190, but they think it might have been written 150, 160. I think that's when they believe Melito of Sardis passed away in the year 190. Anyway, this is what could be described as the Passover Seder used by Messianic believers. But it mentions here another writing of the Quatrodecimans, the early Jewish Christians, or a sect of the early Jewish Christians, called the Epistula Apostolorum. He has read that on his. If you want to listen to it, you don't want to have the time to read it, you can bring up his channel, Apocryphile 1970, and he reads the epistles to the apostles. What this is, it's kind of a mini gospel. So what it does is it goes through in a few paragraphs, the life and passion and miracles of Jesus, and then the resurrection. But it also it's written in us. And this was only discovered I think 100 years ago. Epistula Apostolorum, which means the Epistle of the Apostles, right? And apparently it might have been written by Jewish Christians in Greek, but it survived only in Coptic, the way the Gospel of Thomas has survived, and in Ethiopic. And like I said, there are only these two versions of this ancient writing called the Epistle of the Apostles. And the Epistle of the Apostles probably dates as early, perhaps, as the year 120, right? So this is very ancient. It's like people are trying to get back to the Jewish roots of the faith. And we have these writings that the early Jewish Christians wrote, and nobody even knows that they exist, right? And here they are. They're telling us about, we're trying to do Christ in the Passover. So, all right. I wanted Robert to talk. One more thing about Robert before he comes up is.
What about Robert?
No. This is. I want to talk about this. So we have our YouTube channel, and I'm sure.
Have you checked today?
Yeah, that's correct. They've hit Robert. Robert's not doing anything remotely. On his Facebook, he talks about what's going on in our country and the reason why we need to have strong constitutionalism. But he doesn't do any of that on his YouTube channel. In fact, for the most part, like I just talked about the Epistle of the Apostles, and
like your video was fraud.
Yeah. Well, that's what they did to me. That's something else.
He had a camera on his head, and it was fraud.
Right. I want to talk about that. I got to get Robert up here in just 3 minutes. I want to mention that real quick, and I'm going to talk about this. So Robert's been, they shadow ban us, right? What's Robert's doing? He's just reading apocryphal text, very little, commentary.
They knocked Julie off again. She just got back on.
Yeah. So what had happened? This is something that's very, very important. What had happened is I was at January 6th. I was there all day long until about 3:30. I left to get back home. I had to catch my flight. I didn't see any violence. I was there over 8 hours.
That's the problem.
And so what had happened is I videoed it. I did have a GoPro on my head and I had another camera. I filmed the whole thing and I put it online, and they took it down for fraud. And I contested that. I said, "How is this fraud? This is raw, unedited footage of Now Tucker Carlson released some. They lost their ever-loving minds, and in fact, they pressured. What is that family? The Murdoch family, You know what Murdoch is? Murdoch is the evil satanic god of ancient Babylonia. So maybe his name is fitting. But they censored. I have to take my hat off to Tucker Carlson for talking about that and releasing those
I think
those
he's been
video
threatened
footage.
because he didn't play the
But he
second.
hasn't played anything since. So we need the truth out of it. That was there. In fact, and Tucker said this himself. He's afraid to address it, but he has video showing all. He believes, watching the video, that almost all the agitators and violent people were federal agents. You see their earpieces. You see them working with the police
Whispering,
officers.
yeah.
He described that, but he's afraid, probably because Murdoch won't let him show it. I hope that they release all
They
that
might have
video.
threatened his family.
So, our YouTube channel, even though it's social, they got the shadow banning, it's still making an impact. People saw Brother Robert's teachings, and they asked for his tracts. Now, he gave me these tracts over 10 years ago, and I lost them. So, I got some copies. If you want his, he's got 6 different tracts, and he might bring some more next time he comes and shares.
Hallelujah.
So, I told him 10:30 to 11, so now I'm going to let Robert come up and share. And if you want to take copies of his tracts, they're right here. So somebody contacted me wanting them, and I told them I'd get a hold of them. I'd ask Robert to give me the copies, and I'll make sure she gets them. So what happened is somebody saw our YouTube channel, and then they looked and they saw our kingofsaints.net site, and they contacted me wanting additional information from Robert.
Awesome.
And Robert, he downloads our videos and he uploads them on his channel, but he is noting that he's sharing this at King of Saints Tabernacle to help publicize
We're
our
thankful
work.
for Robert C. Farrell.
Yes. All right. So let's let Robert. I think. Yeah. Well, I'll be sharing. So I just want to get those important points this morning.
Thank you, Doctor. Very nice of you. Couple of things. I'm sort of doing a similar thing to teaching out of the Gospel of Thomas on my YouTube channel, but it's what I did was I had a collection of the Grapha, and I know some of you guys have the CD of that. Maybe if you've listened to it, you've noticed that they're very much alike. They're very similar bodies. But I took the time to actually integrate the Gospel of Thomas into my Grapha collection, so it was arranged thematically.
Right.
And so Thomas is a little bit disjointed on its own.
Just to mention, agrapha are words of Jesus that aren't found in the Gospels.
The 4 Gospels.
Some of them are in the Book of Acts, maybe in the 1 or 2 of the epistles, but most of them are written by the church fathers in the apocryphal text. Just so people know. And it's another
So
story.
I did an audio treatment of it too. So it's all arranged thematically. These are just the loose and scattered words of Yeshua that have come down to us through time. But I wanted to, and I'm going to bring some next week. So if we're a little bit short, maybe prioritize the people who aren't going to be here next week. Like if you know you're not going to be here next week, maybe you could take one. I'll bring some more next week. And that's the same is true with the Thomas. I think there's a couple of these, maybe 2 or 3 of them over there on the table. If somebody doesn't have one, if somebody could maybe grab them off the table and distribute those so that they can follow along. But I'll bring some more of those next week if I get a chance, just so that when we get more people in here, they'll all have their own copy. I know that we left off last week on Logian 56. Let me finish it real quick. But if you listen to that CD, if you listen to that CD, I think what you may notice, and I'm hoping you notice, is the unity of thought that transcends, that starts with a beginning. It has an introduction that's similar to John's introduction, for example. It has sort of an outro, if you will. It sort of loosely follows the sequence of the gospel because there's just that amount of material out there that you can integrate it like that. And all of these sayings and stuff, they're arranged thematically. I'm not making any pretense in saying that this is definitely the order or this is some definitive thing. In fact, I've really resisted putting numbers on these or chapter titles or anything like that because I don't want this to be fixed in anybody's idea. I don't want to kill it,
Well, you did
if you will,
thematically.
by limiting it. You know what I'm saying? This is a living, breathing thing. When new documents show up or when something comes to light, I want to be able to see it in the light of everything else. Because the real questionability is if any of this stuff is seen in isolation, there's a certain kind of question mark. Did he or did he not? Right? But it's like anything, like if you have multiple witnesses of anything, if you have one person saying something, it's a little less certain than if you have two. And if you have two, it's a little less certain than if you have three. And if you have hundreds of witnesses, which is what I think what this boils down to. I mean, a lot of these come from the same source, but I would say that there's maybe almost 100 different sources that these things are comprised of. And there are probably more that I could have put in there. But if you listen to this from beginning to end, and especially in light of the keys, and especially in light of the knowledge or whatever that it's trying to impart to you as you listen to it, it seems so smooth. One verse just leads into another, into another, into another, and you forget there are over 370 different graphons or logions that are integrated into this. So this is not some weird Frankenstein's monster. This is a very smooth, very
Harmonious.
yeah, it is very harmonious. And it shocked even me as I was listening to it, because I just kept looking at it, kept thinking, what is the mind behind this? What is the spirit behind this? You know, and it just kept occurring to me that it wasn't this disjointed thing. Thomas is a little bit disjointed, and so integrating Thomas into what was already an orderly arrangement of his sayings from elsewhere, that just made the understanding of Thomas a little easier, a little bit stronger. And I'm also doing an exposition on my YouTube channel, but it's not getting huge ratings. It's not huge. I mean, there's like 400, 500, 600 views on each one. So it's not a huge draw, which surprises me.
Shadow
Because the
Man.
Gospel of Thomas is, well, it could be that, but the Gospel of Thomas is really not as popular, I think, as it should be. Like, there's a really good, like, live action sort of rendition of it that probably some of you have seen on YouTube. And I look at the view count; it's not even up to 1 million views.
Right.
You know, and it shocks me that there's so little interest in the
By the
Christian
way,
world.
I do have a dramatization of the Gospel of Thomas on my channel.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
I have
You've
one,
done-
and there's another one.
But you know, it's almost a guaranteed flop to do this. But I think it's important to do this.
I got
You know,
Amen.
but in any case, but just so that you guys know, if you guys listen to this and it starts sounding like it's one big thing, you know what I'm saying? I think that should be telling us something, that there's a greater truth behind it. And that if you got this source, that source, this place, this time, all coming together to say the same thing, I think you're talking about a whole cloud of witnesses, so to
Right.
speak. You know what I'm saying? So they're all speaking with one voice, so to speak, one
We're used
language.
to that in the Word.
So starting with 57, this is something we have in Matthew too, and it's a little bit further explained in Matthew. This is a sort of a curtailed version of it without the interpretation. But we all know what the interpretation is because Jesus gives us this himself. It says, "The kingdom of the Father is like a man who had good seed. His enemy came by night and sowed weeds among the good seed. The man did not allow them to pull up the weeds. He said to them, I am afraid that you will go, intending to pull the weeds up and pull the wheat along with them. For on the day of the harvest, the weeds will be plainly visible, and they will be pulled up and burned." Now, I think this is the one line that really distinguishes it from what we see in Matthew, where it literally says that on the day of the harvest, which again, a day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are as a day. There's a little bit of room for interpretation as far as our dating is concerned, but as far as like the number of thousands of years from the birth of Yeshua, for example, we know it's pretty close to 2,000. So if we were talking about those last 2,000 years and then there being a millennium, the third day, in other words, starting from Yeshua, right, then we're pretty much in that time. We're in that time frame. So that's the day of the harvest. So this is where we should be expecting to see revelation. This is where we should be expecting to see the differentiation between the weeds and the wheat and the tares, right? And I think we're seeing that culturally, right? Because again, one of the things it says in the book of Revelation is that outside of the city are those who love and make a lie, right? And the reason why they're outside of the city is because the entrance into the city is by means of truth, by means of loving the truth and manifesting the truth. And so as you do that, you become his members, his mouths, his hands, you know, his eyes, his ears, to speak to the world, to shine light into the world. And so what we have is a differentiation in this last time between the sheep and the goats, let's say, between the wheat and the tares. It says that these tares will be bound up. Remember, the strong man in Thomas is bound up, right? So there's a connection there. right? But it's important to make these connections because they're speaking a universal language. They're all speaking with one voice, so to speak, one secret language, one set of keys that's universal to all of these books. And the thing that differentiates the person who has ears to hear that higher level meaning, in other words, and eyes to see the patterns in the scriptures and put two and two together, so to speak, and make a cohesive whole out of it, that person is able to understand what the Spirit is and what the truth is by what the words are that are coming out of Yeshua's mouth. In other words, they're able to read what they're able to know he is from what he's saying, and that's another ongoing theme in the Gospel of Thomas as well.
Sheep
That
of my voice.
right, because those who don't have that ability are spiritually dead. But they're becoming more and more plainly visible because even in the world of politics, and I don't want to limit this to politics, but in the world of religion too, people are questioning the traditions of Christianity. They're questioning what we've been taught all of this time. So it's happening in the world of Christianity. It's also happening in the world of the
In the
secular.
family, too.
You've got people where you've got actual truth being suppressed by those who love and make the lie. They make it, they produce it, right? They're consciously, knowingly, forcefully shutting down people who are speaking the truth because they are speaking the truth, because they are on the side of the lie, because they love the lie. I mean, it just kind of goes around on itself. But the thing is, you've got two sides. You've got two kingdoms, like it says in the Didache and in other places, the Shepherd of Hermas. It talks about there's a kingdom of light and there's a kingdom of darkness, and there's a whole range of activities involved in keeping things in darkness, and there's a whole range of activities, conversely, that we are given to shed light and to cast light and to manifest light. And I think that we're coming in upon this stage because as the deception increases, the truth will increase. You know, and it's all going to separate between the weeds and the wheat and the tares, those on the right hand, those on the left hand, however you want to break it. It's broken down so many different ways in the scriptures, but it's basically the good guys and the bad guys, those who cast light and those who cast darkness, right? The children of light versus the children of darkness. It's an ongoing thing with the Essenes too. One of the things that the Essenes were doing is they were reading books outside of the canon, so they were rejecting the authority, the religious authorities at the time, right? That's clear from the fact that they were reading out of these other books and venerated these other books and stuff. So they saw them as unclean. They saw them as something to stay away from, right? And I think that right now these weeds are becoming plainly visible. And so that's the contribution that Thomas has. And again,
I think it reminds us of what John McTernan was saying when he was debating, was it Tobias Singer? And it's like Tobias Singer knows the truth, and yet he's decided that he's going to oppose the truth. So we see that going on now.
But
and the other thing is like what's been going on. I recommend people look at the Twitter files, but they've been repressing true stories of people that had adverse reactions to this the clot shot. And this is true, but we're going to repress it because they have a lie that they want to advocate.
Including medical authorities and top medical authorities.
well, again, this transcends all. These are just signs and manifestations of it. It's a whole.
He's the father
There's
of
a
lies.
kingdom of death and there's a kingdom of life. And see, the life gave itself up and allowed the lie, if you will, to run its course. That's why he says, let the weeds grow until the day of the harvest, because that's what I'm talking about. On that day, you're going to see there's going to be a differentiation, right?
Yeah.
But up until
Sheep
this
and
point,
goats.
just leave it alone. Let it take its course, right? Let them do what they're going to do. Revelation says that too.
And watch
Let the
me.
wicked be wicked, right?
The harvest.
Just let the
Yes.
chips
Amen.
fall where they may,
Amen.
Yes.
right? So that's kind of the moral there. But that's the one differentiation I wanted to point out. It does talk about there will be a very clear difference between the wheat and the tares, and I think we're seeing that.
Clear and clear. Amen.
And
I wonder
so,
if that's a clear indication for us that we should be being a little less, being a little more careful about how we confront these things. You can win a lot more flies with honey than you can with vinegar.
Right. It
I think
also
it's-
says, let the evil be evil, so because they're going to get their just desert. But he says, let the
Amen.
good
Yeah.
remain good as well, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's what he says. Jesus says that.
well, yeah, you wouldn't want to get in the way of God's will, I don't think, in any of this.
And the reward too.
So it moves on. Blessed is the man who has suffered and found life. Well, again, going back to the first thing, I keep going back to this because this is one of the most important things that you'll understand, the most important paradigm you'll understand. What is the difference between the living and the dead? The way that it's spoken of in the Gospel of Thomas is it says, in Logian 1, it says, whoever finds the interpretation of these sayings will not experience death, right? And in the Greek version, it says, whoever hears these words will never taste death. So find the interpretation and hears, that's like key given through parallelism. Hearing, right, is finding the interpretation, in other words, right? So whoever has ears to hear also has ears to understand the interpretation. So the fact that you can understand it, the fact that you can hear it, in other words, is evidence, well, really proof of its existence. The truth of it is self-evident. It's self-fulfilling and it's self-revelatory. And so you don't need somebody to intervene, because once you get it, you get it. Once you hear it, you hear it. Once you see it, you see it. So it's not a matter of belief, it's a matter of seeing. And so when you talk about plainly visible, right, that means that fog has lifted. Your eyes are open, so to speak. Your ears are open and you see it and you hear it. But the living and the dead, the way that the living are portrayed is they're the ones who understand and they hear the words, right? They see the patterns. They see what is before them, right? And the dead are the ones who do not. So spiritually
Yeah,
dead,
they do not.
right?
No.
So it says, and it goes on. It says, and let him who seeks continue seeking until he finds. Here's the struggle. So you're seeking, you seek, and you seek, and finally it's revealed to you. When he finds, he will become troubled, right? That's the trouble. And he will be astonished, and he will rule over the all. And the Greek adds, and not only will he reign, but in reigning he will rest. So the resting is, like I said before, I know I've said it a dozen times, but if you're looking for something and then you find it, then you're no longer looking. That whole
Right.
activity of looking is now over, and you can be at rest. So once you've found the truth, you can settle on the truth, right? And you can stand on it, and you can rely on it. So if you come to recognize the truth, and you found life, you found the interpretation of these words, you understand that this was written 2,000 years ago for our benefit, for our time, for the day of the harvest, when the wicked, and you know what I'm saying? And it's the same thing that Enoch says. He says, that this is for a time when the wicked and the godless are to be removed. So that book was meant to be taken out until the day that the wicked and the godless are to be removed. He repeatedly says it's not for our time, but for a time which is to come, right? So when you know you're in that day and age, when you can see the differentiation. So if you actually suffered and found this truth, in other words, the life, again, he is the way, the truth, and the life, right?
Right.
You found
Yes.
Yeshua, you found your Lord
Yes.
in the Word, because he is the Word, because you see that and you internalize it, and you
Yeah.
become one with it. You see it feeds on itself, right? Take heed of the living one, therefore, in other words, while you were alive, lest you die. So understand the one who is living is the one who's speaking truth to you, right? And while he is still alive, in other words, while you're still able to understand what he's saying, because these things were encoded, right, for the benefit of us at the end to decode it, right? Because again, the end is at the beginning is at the end. If you found the beginning, you'll find the end, because the interpretation is that it was encoded, and then if you can decode it, then you know that it was encoded, and encoding was at the beginning, and decoding is at the end, and they're the same thing,
Right.
So it's pretty logical, actually. And okay, so moving on to the next one. Because again, it says that if you die, you're unable to see him, right? If this mystery was lost for 2,000 years, again, they were in a state of spiritual death. They didn't have eyes that could see. They didn't hear ears that could hear. They weren't able to find the interpretation of this stuff. And this has been sitting in the hands of scholars since 1945, right? So is it that they couldn't put 2 and 2 together? Well, either they could and they hid it from us, or they couldn't and they're not worthy to preach it.
Right.
You see what I'm
Exactly.
saying? Because
Yes.
they're caught up in their own, let the dead bury their dead. In other words,
Right.
those who are spiritually dead are going to cover things up with the earth, right? The earthly meaning. And they're going to bury other people who are also spiritually dead with that earthly understanding. So it says, okay, so they saw a Samaritan carrying his lamb on the way into Judea. He said to his disciples, why is this man carrying this lamb? I don't like this particular interpretation, but that's what he says. Why is the man carrying the lamb? He says, said to him, so that he may kill it and eat it. He said to them, while it is alive, he will not eat it, but only when he has killed it and it has become a corpse. And they say, well, he cannot do so otherwise. And he says to them, you too look for a place for yourself within repose, lest you become a corpse and be eaten. So a couple of things. If you ever kind of lost on this, or you ever just want a hint as to where to go with something that you're finding maybe a little difficult to see through or understand, always insert metaphorical or spiritual in front of a word. It's an easy way to see it. Because, okay, so what is it that you eat spiritually? What is it you eat metaphorically, right? It's not what goes into your mouth that defiles you, it's what comes out of your mouth, right? What you eat spiritually is is the Word of God, right? That's your spiritual food, in other words,
Because it
spiritual
is
drink. He says, he even says that about himself, that whoever eats my flesh, right?
Food and drink.
That's food, and whoever drinks my blood, that's drink indeed, right?
That's from John 7.
But what is the repose then? See, if the mystery was always understood to be something that was going to be overcome by evil people, there were going to be evil people who were going to go after the people who knew the truth. See, it wasn't because they so loved Yeshua that they went out and killed all the heretics, right? It doesn't make sense. Judas betrayed Yeshua with a kiss. That's telling us something. That's a feigned affection for the Logos that would lead to the trial of the Logos, the execution of the Logos, the burial of the Logos, but would ultimately also result in the resurrection of the Logos, right? So in other words, if the resurrection of him in the physical is on the third day, then the resurrection of the Logos in the spiritual is on the third spiritual day. A day is 1,000 years, 1,000 years is a day. That's a canonical statement, so it's hard to argue with that, metaphorically. So, but he won't eat it while it is alive, because he's not able to process it with the understanding. He has to kill it first, and then you have traditional Christianity, is the eating of the word in its dead state without understanding the ultimate meaning of it. It's an interim
It's just
thing.
reading it.
But that interim is what he calls the repose. And you see, there were 27 books of the New Testament that were killed and eaten. And then there were a whole bunch of other books that just existed in repose, right? And were not eaten, so to speak, by Christianity. But all of that which was dead, right, that was made dead by people's lack of ability to understand them, still has life in it, right? So it still is alive. It's just that we're the difference. Moving on to the next one. Two will rest on the bed, one will die, the other will live. Salome said, "Who are you, man, that you have come upon my couch and eaten from my table?" Yeshua said to her, "I am he who exists from the undivided. I was given some of the things of my Father." And it's not in the text, so I left it there in brackets. It says, "I am your disciple." That presumably is Salome, because it makes less sense to think that that's Yeshua saying that. "Oh, I am your disciple, Salome," right? And then also, who do you attribute? "Therefore I say that if he is destroyed, he will be filled with light, but if he is divided, he will be filled with darkness," right? So let's start with the idea of being destroyed. I don't know that this is a really good translation, but what I think he's saying is if this division between you and the light is destroyed, then the light can come in. Whatever keeps you from it, I think that's what he's getting at. In other words, because it's contrasted with division, so it's got to be something to do with unity, right? Because it says if he is divided, he will be filled with darkness. What? Well, because if you're divided, what you're not recognizing is the heavenly couched in the earthly. If you're divided, is what you're not recognizing that what is heavenly being couched in what is earthly, that it can also be extracted from what is earthly and seen in the heavenly, right? And so the two are actually one thing, because it is inherent within the higher is inherent in the lower. And so because of the lower as a means of preservation and as a means of conveyance through time, that can also be resurrected, so to speak, that you can actually come to life from reading this. But the question is, sorry, I gotta put that. The question is, who are you that you have come upon my couch and eaten from my table? So he answers the question in two parts too. Who am I? The who am I part is, I am he who exists from the undivided. What does that mean? In other words, to him, the truth, the heavenly and the earthly, are inherent within each other. That they are one unitary thing. That the lower is the means of conveyance of the higher. It is the preservation of the higher. And so that's who he is. That's the who are you part. And then why have you come and eaten from my table? Right? That was the I was given some of the things of my Father part of that question. Right? So what is he eating from her table? Well, there's a couple of things. If you understand it from the point of view of him eating food, I guess, from her table, I guess if that's her spiritual food, what she believes or whatever, he's willing to eat it, right? It means that he is eating something from her table. In other words, what she believes or what she doesn't. But in other words, he's taking and eating food a second time, let's say. You know what I'm saying? He's eating from her table. And so, in other words, what is it that he's eating then? If it's not something to do with scriptural or spiritual food, in other words, that somehow she's providing him with that. This is a little bit out of context, so it's a little bit hard to get anything particular out of this. But what we do have is that he exists from the undivided, and he was given some of the things from the Father to eat from her table. So whatever it is that she's bringing to the table, he's eating it now. You know, and it moves on. But I mean, as far as being filled with light, filled with darkness. In other words, if you don't have the knowledge of the unity of the heavenly and the earthly, then you're divided because you're separated from that knowledge, right?
Yes.
Whereas if you do have that knowledge, you're at one with that knowledge, and it's clear to you, and therefore you don't walk in darkness. You correspondingly, therefore, will walk in the light. And it says, and he goes on to in Logian 62. It says, "It is to those who are worthy of my mysteries that I tell my mysteries. Do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing." So those on the left hand then don't know the mysteries, and those who are on the right hand do. And the reason that they do is because they're worthy. Now, it isn't because they're better people. It's not because they're superior in some kind of way. What is the method by which you come to know these mysteries? It says, "Who let him who seeks continue to seek until he finds." So seeking is part of that worthiness, right? Persistence and the willingness to overcome difficulty or something that might cause you to question something, and then you would therefore become troubled by it. That is the test of worthiness, to stick to it in order to come to this knowledge. But the payoff is that you'll rule over the all. So that's what he means by those who are worthy, because who does he say elsewhere gets the knowledge? Is those who struggle to find it, right? So it's about your pursuit of that. And so those on your left hand, and for those of us who are right-handed, I mean, we understand it's easier to write with your right hand, it's easier to throw with your right hand, it's more sure, it's more stable, you know what I'm saying? Whereas if you're talking about your left hand, I mean, if I try to write with my left hand, I might as well be trying to write with my toes or
Shooting, they
something.
call
It doesn't quite work.
Right.
So you're talking about people perhaps who could do things who could speak with a certain level of precision that somebody who maybe on the left hand wouldn't be able to speak with. Who might have a certain acuity that the person on the left hand might not have. Who might have a certain something together, you know, whereas the person on the left hand is just a mishmash of thousands of different angles on religion and different points of view, and it's all confused and muddled, and it doesn't have the same sort of precision, it doesn't hold the same weight. But the long and the short of it is it takes a struggle to come to find and to know the mystery, but that's essentially what this age is about. It's about allowing, if you will, the weeds or the evil people to rule for a certain time so that they can make enough rope to sort of hang themselves, so to speak. They're going to be bound up, in other words,
Absolutely.
like it says in Matthew.
Like
They're going to be
Pharaoh
bound up
or Haman.
and then thrown into the fire, right?
Yeah.
So that's what they're good for. And do I have time to do another one?
Let's start with 63 now.
Okay.
Just note what Jesus in the gospel says, you know, let your left hand know what your right hand's doing. So some of these scriptures, these verses we read, and of course the parable, the enemy that sowed the weeds among the good seed, that's also something. So not these verses, many of these verses have parallels with what's in our canonical gospels, such as the next verse. And let's close with this one, verse 63.
Okay. Well, starting with 63, there's kind of a series of story parables where Yeshua tells his story. So it's almost a good breaking point, but I'll do the first one here. It says, "There was a rich man who had much money. He said, I shall put my money to use so that I may sow, reap, plant, and fill my storehouse with the produce, with the result that I shall lack nothing," right? Such were his intentions, but that same night he died. Let him who has ears hear. right? So again, whoever has ears to hear, in other words, they have an ear to hear the flesh, but they also have an ear to hear the spirit,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
What does it mean when he says that he died then? So when he says that, let him who has ears to hear, he's basically saying, look, this is parabolic, read it on the parabolic level. That's an instruction, right? So reading it on the parabolic level, what is the night, right? What is the death? The death is a spiritual death,
Death.
right? The
Exactly.
night
Yes.
is the spiritual age of
Yes.
death,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So what was the thing that caused separation in him, right? What was the thing that he got separated? He didn't see Yeshua in himself, right? He didn't see himself in Yeshua. He saw himself as the beginning and the end of everything.
Well, the duality.
Right.
This
of
was-
we see the heavenly places.
Well, when you're given money, what are you supposed to do with it? I mean, first of all, you're supposed to give it away, but when your master gives you money, you're supposed to work with it. You're supposed to do something for his kingdom, for his benefit,
Right.
right?
He did it all
And
himself.
it's like,
Another
this is
parable.
all about me. So
Yeah.
the minute you make it about yourself, you enter into a spiritual death. You enter into a spiritual night.
99.
So when the church became about itself, right? When it became about its own thing, and this is to a large extent true about Judaism too. When Judaism became about itself, it began and ended with itself, right? Then it lost its way. So in other words, you have to incorporate, because again, what is the wealth? What is the money he had, right? I mean, if it's metaphorical money, he had this knowledge, in other words. He had the truth, right? And he squandered it by thinking in terms of only himself rather than the kingdom,
And
rather
also
than
hoards
the
it,
truth.
hoards it to himself.
Yeah, but that led to his death. That led to his separation. The ego. You have to lose yourself to find yourself. The self-satisfaction, the self-gratification, the whatever that this person had separated him from the truth.
All right, I guess we'll close here.
Parenthetically, Perry Stone teaches that the rich man
That's good, Robert.
who died that night was Solomon.
True.
He says that man is Solomon, talking about how he's going to build more and store more.
Yeah. So he had already.
Sometimes-
It was
He
Solomon.
had
he's
already
talking
taken for
about.
granted that he's gonna be living a long time to enjoy
There-
all of that.
There is some comfort in this parable because you got these wicked people and they have all these designs. Oh, I have this money, I have this power. Let's do, that God can bring it all to naught just like that. Who do you think you are? This man, I don't fear God. It's wise to save up for the rainy day, but to hoard everything, like Robert was saying, we need to be giving as well. And then to be a blessing to others. But these people have their wealth, they have their power, and I'm going to dominate. And it's like you're a mortal man.
Right.
And God can injure, frustrate all your plans just like that.
And
So
the
we need to
problem
be
is-
praying that it does happen with these people's evil schemes. The other thing I want to talk about, like I mentioned, I need to go through and read it carefully myself. The Epistula Apostolorum. That's the Epistle of the Apostles. Maybe when we're over halfway through the Gospel of Thomas, I like maybe the next thing to go on to have Robert teach us from that. And the Epistula Apostolorum is very important because it's early Jewish Christian work. It's about the Passover, but it also is biblical in its theology. It affirms doctrines, and it also has a section, I believe, where it talks about the descentus, the herring of hell. So by going over this ancient Messianic Jewish writing, I think that Robert could edify us with that. And I think the concept of what Yeshua did when he's in the heart of the earth, if you will, is very important. And supposedly Mel Gibson's finally making his movie on the resurrection of Christ, where he, I guess using special effects is going to show that. I hope he does it. He's also supposed to make a movie on the Maccabees, and I think that'd be a very powerful film as well.
Absolutely.
All right, who's going to close us out in a word of prayer? Let's- Paul Jackson, why don't you do that
Yeah.
for us?
Father God, we thank you for having allowed us an opportunity to gain more of your words being incorporated into our lives. May you give us what we need in order to receive it and then put it to work. We thank you for Robert for his instructions, the word of wisdom that he shared with us. We ask you to just have mercy on us and grant us what it is that we need from our lives. Of fixing our minds and heart, body and soul, and divinity, that what you provide for us is sufficient. Give us the encouragement to move on. In bless us as we enter into the main service today, Lord. What it is that you will be in control of, have an effect on us, to go through our experience. Please hear our prayer.
Amen.